I thought it was only 23 years? That happened 22 years ago. Did you get that big bump at that time? Prior to that, everything was fine for 2023. Regardless, it was still pleasant. I don't think so, but in 2022 it was huge for 1 year as a full-time vice president. God is already at work in the lives of those who will follow you as leaders in the church, and although it may have seemed like you had a large savings account set aside for us all, that is simply the tip of the iceberg. Because you gave them up, it is not about the fame and fortune. The following is an old tale. Oh, they're multimillionaires. This ministry that employs them generates a substantial income. They possess this. How has this affected your finances? Did it lead to a financial loss for you? At the tender age of 23, I am a very wealthy vice president of Daystar, am I not? Yes, 22. How did you get such a large baby bump? Prior to that, everything was fine for 2023. Regardless, it was still pleasant. I don't think so, but in 2022 it was huge for 1 year as a full-time vice president. They want you to believe they have saved you a fortune and are prepared to take care of you, as if you had $1 million in the bank or something. No, but selling your house might be your only option now to keep from going bankrupt. I thought you were already taken care of. Yes, exactly. In fact, we haven't cut back on our mortgage or any of our other bills since we had more money coming in. Both of us, I mean. Because he became president in 22, I also received a raise. Prior to that, I was much smaller than my relatives. Upon getting married after dating for a while, we spent $200,000 on a house. For 8 years, we called that house home. We were very profitable. The quantity was satisfactory. It wasn't excessive nor insufficient. It worked just fine for a long time. Since I was primarily a mother, the fact that my salary was lower than that of a Starbucks employee was acceptable to me. Nothing like a large savings account exists for us. Greetings to all you fellow believers. Surprisingly candid and open was this interview with Johnathan and Susie. Money, decisions, and the impact of leaving Daystar and everything that came with it were all topics they covered. Also, trust me when I say that nobody saw it coming. Because it established the tone for the entire discussion, let's start with the reporter's words. You gave up the money, you gave up the fame. It becomes clearer when you consider the number of people who believed Johnathan and Susie had millions in their possession. But rather than evade the inquiry, they divulged personal details. Their remarks might shock a lot of people. In 2022, Johnathan claimed to have received a substantial salary increase. He was well off financially because he was Daystar's vice president. The catch, though, is that increased income was only sustained for that 1 year. Their lives appeared to be ordinary prior to that. Their way of life, they claimed, was ordinary and average, but in a good way. Their delivery was one of genuine modesty and humility. Furthermore, Susie claimed that her lower salary compared to that of a Starbucks barista was the reason why she was not complaining. She reassured him that being a full-time mom was perfectly fine with her. Isn't that how things actually stand? For many, that is the way of life. Making do with what they have allows them to scrape by. For 8 years, they called a $200,000 mansion home. This structure is not a private residence nor a mansion. Those folks are just being themselves and going about their days. They are currently unprepared for life. They must settle the debt on their home. Their bills still need to be paid, just like everyone else's. They may be forced to sell their home if things continue as they are, according to the interviewer. They have reached that level of realism. Once again, this demonstrates how easily people can infer meaning. When people associate themselves with a major church like Daystar, images of private jets, mansions, and secret bank accounts containing millions of dollars immediately come to mind. The conversation, however, revealed the story's human aspect. It wasn't as simple as Johnathan and Susie parting with their cash. They departed from a life of stability, security, and predictability. It demonstrates that they aren't driven by power or wealth. It requires courage and trust. To rephrase, this discussion proves that those who claim to have given up all are not exaggerating. Truly, it was. They passed up a platform, a lucrative opportunity, and a future that seemed to be written in stone. They reasoned that it was the correct thing to do, so they opted for something more challenging and less exciting instead. It also makes you wonder about the standards by which famous people are evaluated. Assumptions are made based on last names, job titles, or links without all the facts being known. Unseen by us, individuals have given their all behind the scenes. Both Johnathan and Susie have accomplished a great deal. What really stuck out throughout this conversation, though, wasn't simply the financial stuff. Their honesty was the deciding factor. They made no effort to improve the sound quality. They refrained from retaliating. At a time when many prominent people and leaders appear to shirk responsibility or provide evasive responses, their candor is refreshing. What really matters is that Johnathan Lamb and Susie aren't exactly living the high life. It's an authentic tale of trust, decision-making, and letting go of desires. Believe them regardless of your disagreement with them. Bravery is required to forego ease in pursuit of principle. Come on, we need to see the rest of the film. That's why, when things became heated, i.e. when we arrived in 22 following his death, and Johnathan and I both received substantial compensation, you would think that would be the time to consider staying. We were more prepared than before, though, by that time. The thought of asking God, when will Johnathan be ready so I can sell this house, came close to bringing me to tears. It's time for a fresh beginning for me. 50 states are at our disposal. Truthfully, we are willing to do anything. If we had simply put on an act, disregarded our beliefs, read the card, lauded my mom's marriage, and continued to refrain from questioning anything about Pete, we would have had everything my father said we would have. If my mother had retired or passed away, I would have assumed the presidency. Something was jotted down. Choosing between the good and the bad isn't always the case. Choosing between the easy and the right things can be challenging at times. That which was discussed in this podcast by Johnathan and Susie Lamb. They spoke from the heart, and what they said was spot on. Let us begin by discussing Susie's remarks. They were profound. Following her father-in-law's passing in 2022, she opened up about her emotions. That was a significant shift for their household. Logic dictates that they should fortify themselves and remain put at this point. Why? Because after all that suffering they finally felt better. At last, they were receiving a substantial sum of money. Vice President now belonged to Johnathan. Plus, according to Susie, her salary was excellent. In monetary terms, things were better than they had ever been. Most people would stay if that were the case, let's be honest. After things have finally settled down financially, emotionally, and logistically, why would you ever consider leaving? However, Susie's emotions were elsewhere. According to her, she was ready to depart at this very moment. I am deeply moved by that. Please examine that. At last, when everything appeared to be stabilizing on the outside, she prayed to God for direction. The reason wasn't evasion of responsibility, rather, she wished to be forthright. She was willing to start over if it meant being honest in her life. It was said, I'm ready to sell this house, I'm ready for a new beginning. You believe and you take action. That goes beyond mere courage. Wow, Johnathan really made his point when he spoke afterwards. According to him, 50 states were available for selection. Their statement that they were leaving the situation was sincere. They were prepared to start anywhere in the nation. The line that struck a chord with me the most was, we lay everything on the altar for the truth. Remember that. I think you understand. They were prepared to sacrifice anything and everything, including their wealth, property, status, inheritance, security, and even their lives. They were willing to give it all up to do the right thing. As he put it, they could have gotten what they wanted if they had gone along with the charade, and simply smiled, remained silent, and supported decisions they disagreed with. If they had remained silent and pretended that his mom's remarriage and leadership weren't a problem, Johnathan told them, he would have been Daystar's president in no time. He assured me that it was documented. Everything was prepared for him to receive that portion as if it were a gift. Still, he walked away. Neither of them acted coercively or because they were told to. They did it because they prioritized honesty over power, comfort over conviction, and truth over tradition. That is unusual these days, but it was. The majority of people would have grinned and remained silent if you had offered them such leadership, such wealth, and such a legacy. Unfortunately, it was too much for Johnathan and Susie to handle. They were too afflicted by the pain to proceed. They lost a lot of money, sentiment, and relationships because of it. You could tell they were relaxed, though, because of how they spoke. And not the false calm that comes from ignoring issues. Knowing you made the right choice, no matter how difficult it was, brings a genuine sense of peace. It all starts with this radio segment. This proves the Lambs weren't simply making a dramatic exit. These were tough choices, and they prayed a lot about them. In order to remain faithful to their beliefs, principles, and character, they were willing to sacrifice everything, including the world's notion of success. Not often do you see something like that. The takeaway here is that being moral doesn't guarantee you acclaim. At times it can feel very lonely. It may cost a pretty penny. By the end, it'll be worthwhile. Listening to this podcast by Johnathan and Susie reinforced my belief that standing up for what's true is worth risking everything for.